Thank you and welcome back, Mike. Great session this morning with IMCA. It's just like a very interesting series, and to hear from Brett, I'm sorry, was terrific. So I think we've got Jonathan with us, and we're going to bring him on stage, and we're going to let you, carry on for the next 25 minutes, Mike.
All right, that sounds like a winner to me. We're getting toward the finish line here today on Race Industry Week. Jonathan Byrd joins us now. Go ahead, Francis.
Backdrop from last year was a special host from us last year, so thank you.
That was great to be back. Good to see everybody here. Francis, good to appreciate it. Mike, good to see you.
Same here, Jonathan. All right, let's get going. This morning when I was with everybody, we hit the dirt and turned left. This afternoon, we're going to stay primarily on the pavement. We're going to make some left turns, some right turns, and have some close calls at the intersection along the way. Jonathan is the president and general manager of the Indianapolis Speedrome. We're going to talk about the Speedrome today, but also the bigger topic, figure eight racing, one of the small but really exciting forms of motorsports in this country. Jonathan, tell us a little bit about the history of figure eight racing.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here again as well. And I kind of go back and to where I believe the allegorical the story goes that sometime there was another track that had a ramp in a figure eight course. So you go around one end of the racetrack, you go up a ramp and you go down, and underneath the ramp were the other cars coming. And the story goes that the folks at the Indianapolis Speedrome back in the 50s got rid of the ramp and decided that the best way to continue racing is to race right on the same course as everybody else. So the intersection became something that was very much the height of the excitement of everything that was the figure eight. So the Indianapolis Speedrome back in the late 40s, early 50s was the pioneer of the sport. And as the historical thing, that everything went forward from there.
How did you first come in contact with figure eight racing, and then trace that from there to how you became involved at the Speedrome?
Sure. I love to tell the story. I come from a couple generations of racers. My grandmother actually owned an ASA car back in the 60s and took her cars to Daytona. Then she sold that car, and she wore a big old diamond ring the rest of her life that said this was my race car. And of course, that was made my father very interested, Jonathan Byrd. He was very interested in racing back when he was a young man as well. He would be working for Johnny Rutherford as a PMP guy, push and polish at the weekly races at Raceway Park on Friday nights, which was a big deal at the old at Indianapolis Raceway Park. And he always had a love of auto racing. And then early in the 80s, specifically 1982, he built his first, what was called Pro Stock, the division that is now today's late model figure eight race car. That was, he did that with a local gentleman here by the name of Jim Begley. And Jim raced at the Indianapolis Speedrome for my dad in the Pro Stock division. And the Pro Stock division came from the old stock division, where they split it up to an oval and a figure eight. And then John Stiles, the promoter at that time, created the Pro Stock division in 1981 and raced on the oval. And then each night was a big figure eight. And back in the 80s and 90s, and that was the heyday of the sport, where you'd have 40, 50 cars show up every night. And so what had happened there is my dad, loved being a car owner, loved figure eight racing, and took us out there. I was 6 years old. My brother was 5, 6, and 7, 8. We grew up at the Speedrome every Friday, Saturday night, going to the figure eight, and that's where I just absolutely fell in love with racing, specifically auto racing on the figure eight, and the way we do it at the Speedrome especially. So that was a passion for years. And then from there, as the story goes and our history goes, we start racing the USAC regional midget program that John Stiles promoted at the Indianapolis Speedrome, which was where the genesis of Thursday Night Thunder raced. And then my dad didn't really like midgets back then, but he said if I had to support the program, he wanted to go out and find the best, and the best at the time was Rich Vogler. And Rich Vogler won multiple championships for my dad, and then in 1984 won the track championship. And that took us to Indy in 85 because there was a $10,000 bounty for the track champion in the USAC Regional Midget Series. That if they qualified for the Indy 500, there was a $10,000 bounty. And my dad wanted John Stiles' money. So that took us to Indy. And even after all the racing and going to Indy and joining the IRL and doing everything in the 90s and continuing it, we still loved going back to the Indianapolis Speedrome. We never forgot our roots. We always remembered where we came from and what we loved, and that was the figure eight. So I've been able to, for the past 20 years or so, I was invited behind the curtain by some previous promoters at the Speedrome to kind of work there. And so I started selling, I started doing on-track interviews, advertising, marketing, selling fuel. I was a track concessionaire for a couple of years, just kind of learned a little bit about everything. I tried to buy the track on a couple of occasions back then. And then in 2017, the new owner of the track, Kevin Garrigus, I found out he was buying the track. I said, hey, Kevin, would you like me to run the racetrack? And I will tell you this really quick story. The old owner of the racetrack, I said, Kevin, I sat down with him. I said, now, how would you handle this situation? Okay. Roger Penske's at the Speedrome. What do you do? And back in 2015, Tony Stewart had it, and Larry Curry had this big midget race at the Tony Stewart Memorial. And Tony, and so there was also the USAC induction ceremony for their Hall of Fame that weekend. So Roger Penske was part of the inductees into the USAC Hall of Fame. And so Kevin, the owner of the racetrack, says, oh, I'd welcome him. I'd come out and say hello, give him a tour, bring him to the suite, give him stuff to drink. I'm like, well, that's good to know that's the kind of promoter you would have, because this is what actually happened when Roger Penske came to the track. Needless to say, he wasn't, the red carpet wasn't rolled out for by the old owners, but nonetheless, I said, I love figure eight, and he loved figure eight. We love figure eight racing, and we wanted to make it better and better. And the past 7 years, the Indianapolis Speedrome has hit stratospheric, numbers, and our car counts have been really good. I think we would be the envy of a lot of short tracks in this country, where we have over 20 late model, outlaw style, super unlimited figure eight cars on a weekly basis at the Indianapolis Speedrome. So, that's the short answer. Now the long answer. No, I'm kidding, Mike.
Let's talk about the cars specifically for a minute. Tell us a little bit more about the cars.
I will do my best. I am just a chicken cook from Greenwood, Indiana, as you may well know. But nonetheless, I've been around these cars for a while. So the mechanics and the engineering is not my greatest thing, but I marvel at what we do with these figure eight cars. So they are purpose-built figure eight machines. We have 3 or 4 or 5 different car builders who build these cars on a consistent basis. And they are totally tubular. They're not the driver's seat is not offset as it used to be. They've moved the driver more and more to the middle because you want to have that equal weight distribution left to right, because you are running these cars strictly more now in the figure eight than historically when they ran on the oval end of figure eight at the Speedrome back in the day, or even at all the different tracks that they did run back in the 90s and the 80s. And so they have, the cars have evolved from just, little Carrera shocks you bought at AutoZone to 4 and even 5 now. Specific, CSI type suspensions, canister shocks, and adjustable shocks, and all that sort of stuff. Those costs can get expensive. They run ignition boxes for the V8 motors. You can run any size motor you really want to in a figure eight car, because it really comes down to you're going to be able to get all that power down to the ground, especially at the Indianapolis Speedrome. Get on a little 5th mile oval that turns out to be a little bit less than a 1/4 mile on the figure eight course. We put some big wings on them, and sometimes we run some rear spoiler and rear side boards down the sides of the cars. They look like modified cars in a little bit. If you're familiar with an open wheel modified car, they kind of look like that, but they've evolved from that. Specific front and rear suspensions, they run a 2-speed Winner's quick change rear ends mostly. Low gear, high gear. That's basically how it works with that. But they are purpose built. These cars can cost, some guys, how fast you want to go on racing? Well, how much money you got,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
$50,000, $60,000 they can cost, but you can get into the sport with a good used car, a good motor, and learn your way, because you've got to do a lot of laps to become a champion. I can give you many examples over the years of, the premier names of the sport weren't premier names when they started. It took them 5, 6, 10, 15 years to really become the premier names of the sport. And so there's been a lot of evolution of these cars from when they were old Chevy and Corvettes, or they'd be Camaros, or whatever. My dad actually brought in 1984, he took advantage of the rules, which said you had to have an American based car, and they had, and my dad found that the 1979 AMC Pacer was the perfect figure eight car, because it had a short wheelbase. It was 50-50 weight distribution. It was the perfect figure eight car. Brought that car out. Everybody, said that's not a Pacer. Well, what he did was he flattened the back part and he made the roof nice and long. That was this. All the dimensions were there, and then basically in the next couple of weeks, everybody started having AMC Pacers. That's the name of their race cars. So they've evolved from those types of cars to, cars that had front clips from a Chevelle or something, into purpose-built front and rear clips, but very safe. We've done a lot of safety things with these race cars, and a lot of anti-intrusion type of devices and things of that nature. There's not been not any huge serious injuries in a figure eight crash in a very, very long time.
Yeah, I wanted you to demonstrate, that they are purpose-built, really high-tech race cars. I think a lot of people, the only figure eights they've seen, like my only figure eight races were at Riverhead Raceway in New York many years ago, and it was basically a street stock division at that time. So
Absolutely. I mean, the way we do figure eight racing at Indianapolis Speedrome, there's only a couple, three, and I know it was one thing we wanted to talk about, how it's growing. But most people, when they do think of figure eight racing, they think it's jalopies and it's a sideshow and it's a carnival act, but not at the Indianapolis Speedrome. It's the main event each and every night. People come out to see these purpose-built 800 horsepower, loud, screaming machines, defying death at every opportunity when they come through the intersection. You're not only racing the people in front of you and behind you, but you're also racing the people who are coming at you from the other direction. And it's it's a beautiful symphony of racing, and these guys they've raced together and what they do on a weekly basis.
Since you headed in that direction, I'll ask one of the questions I was saving for later. I drive to work every day and go through multiple traffic circles, and people just can't figure that out. And every time I'm sitting there waiting, I think about figure eight drivers, what they go through, and they're trying to navigate the X or the cross or whatever it is. How pivotal is that moment to figure eight racing?
Well, it is, it's a difference between winning, losing, getting hurt, spending $20,000 on a rebuild, and everything in between. What I have always described to figure eight racing is it is more art than science. There's more of an art to it than the science. So as I've talked to racers throughout the years about figure eight racing and how they do it, a lot of the people, first of all, is you want to trust the guy you're racing with. So if you know somebody and you know that they are either they're going to give you a break or they're not going to give you a break, or if they're the leaders, and perhaps you're in mid pack and the leaders are coming through, you're most likely maybe going to give them a break. If you don't know for sure, you want to look at the attitude of the race car. Well, what's the attitude of the race car? Well, if you are accelerating, the nose of the race car is a little bit more up. And if you're decelerating or braking to come into the crossover, your nose is going to be pointed down a little bit. And a lot of the figure eight guys have told me through the years, that's one of the keys to know if a guy's coming or going. And sometimes it's up and down real quick, and you don't know. And that's another interesting, guys think they're gonna have to clear, but then they wait, and the last second they have to go, or the last second make the wrong decision, and that's where we'll see some type of huge collision in the crossover. And then you've got to also, think about, as you're racing, especially at the Indianapolis Speedrome, the north end of the racetrack, the south end of the racetrack, turns 1 and 2, as you come around the outside, you're going to be coming to the inside when you come through turn 3 and 4. And if you're on the inside, you're going to be on the outside coming into turn 1 and 2. And so there's a lot of thought about that, where you want to be, where you don't want to be when you come to those corners. That's what laps and experience brings to the guys. I'd like to talk about our 4-time World Figure 8 champion, Ben Tunney, sometimes. And I talk about Ben, he was a rookie, 2001 or 2. His father was Bill Tunney Sr., or Bill Tunney Jr., man with no fear. Was just a heck of a race car driver. Didn't really, took him a long time. But Ben did not win his first figure 8 for, I want to say, 3 or 4 years. But he'd been around the sport his entire life, helped with that as his race cars. But Ben Tunney today, he's, working his way up on the all-time wins list at figure 8 racing. Indianapolis Speedrome just won last week, 2 weeks ago, at the West Coast Figure 8 Championship out in San Bernardino at Orange Show Speedway. He's won multiple races, but he's been racing now 21 years in a figure 8 race car. He's in his mid to late 30s right now. 21 years he's been racing. And it took him at least 10 years, to win anything substantial and win on a consistent basis. Jack Dossie Jr., our 6-time World Figure 8 champion, now he's late 60s. He's early. He just turned 60, getting ready to turn 60. But in the early 80s, in 1982, interestingly enough, he was a rookie at the Indianapolis Speedrome the same year my dad came on board as a car owner. And in 1982, he did not win a world championship, I believe, until 1989, 7 years. And that's when those guys were racing 50, 60, 70 times a week back in those days, because you'd race Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, sometimes Sunday. Sometimes you'd race at Jeffersonville. Sometimes you race at Louisville. Sometimes you race at Anderson. There'd be the General Tire Series. There was so much racing back then. But it took him 10,000 laps to get good at it. Doug Gregg, another multi-time champion, Legends cars, modifieds at the Speedrome, figure 8 cars. Took him 10, 15 years before he won a figure 8. I mean, these guys, it takes a lot of experience to know how to do it. And so you in oval racing, you could, start when you're in go-karts or quarter midgets or Legends cars and get that experience. And, you're going to win some races probably when you're pretty young. And you see that with, these late model guys in the sport. We just had this year a guy who's been racing 40 years win his first figure 8, finally won a figure 8. So it's exciting when those things happen at the Speedrome. So it's part, like I said, it's a lot art. And then, there is some science to it. There's some strategy to it as well. There's some moves that, as the cars have evolved and as the track has evolved at the Speedrome, that come into play a lot more than it used to be, with diving in and rounding off the corner and diamonding certain places of the racetrack as the cars have evolved, as the tracks evolved, as the suspensions have evolved. I can go on all day about how that works. And I think my love of the sport and just the appreciation, I get to be there. I see it. I've seen, races since 98, 40 some years of figure 8 racing. And there were some times through the 90s and the early 2000s where, I was in college or I was working at Jonathan Byrd's cafeteria. So Fridays and Saturday nights meant working and rolling silverware till 2 a.m. and not being able to go to the Speedrome. And I miss those. I miss the fact that I got to miss a lot of those races, but I'm making up for it now. I haven't missed a figure 8 in over 7 years now.
Wow, that's a good streak. Let's talk about the biggest event, the 3-hour endurance race.
Yes, sir. our biggest race, the Super Bowl, Daytona, Indy 500, all rolled into one. A figure eight racing is the World Figure Eight Championship 3-hour endurance race held every year the Saturday after Labor Day at the Indianapolis Speedrome. And it wasn't always the World Figure Eight Championship. And Mike, I'm sure you know the history of Islip Speedway back in the 70s and they actually the 60s and 70s. That was the spiritual home of the World Figure Eight Championship. So Islip Speedway was on ABC's Wide World of Sports,
Yep.
and your old boss, Mr. Chris Economaki, covered that race for ABC's Wide World of Sports. And Sonny Thompson from Indianapolis, Indiana, our great 8-time Speedrome champion, drove all the way out there in a car sponsored by Washington Auto Parts and the Cohen family, and won the World Figure Eight Championship, a 25-lap race at the old Islip Speedway. So Islip did not close until 1983. And so the national figure eight championship was the 3-hour figure eight race, started in 1977, which was totally unheard of. Back in the 77, John Stiles, the promoter at the Indianapolis Speedrome, the new owner of the track, came up with this 3-hour figure eight concept. And everybody said, there's no way. Drivers can't make it. Cars can't make it. That will never happen in the entire world. Guys will have to come in and, basically get resuscitated and then head back out to the racetrack. And a lot of that resuscitation was cigarettes and beer, but I'm not going to say anything else about that. But nonetheless, my goodness, that it just did not think it was going to happen. And so Jim Fox won that first race in October, which you may not know. Mr. Paul Page was in that first race. Well, the former, the voice of the Indianapolis 500, Paul Page raced in the 3-hour race back in 1977. Then King Kenny St. John, who we just lost this past September, he held on. He was supposed to die the week of the 3-hour, and he held on because I think he wanted to make sure he made it through the race. And so he died like 2 days after this year's World Figure Eight Championship. He won 5 in a row with 5 different cars. And that was when there was pit stops and red flags and guys could take breaks. And then when Islip closed in 1982, then the mantle of the World Figure Eight Championship, the World Figure Eight Championship, got brought into the Indianapolis Speedrome where it's been ran. And this year, 2024, will be the 48th running, the 48th annual edition. We run every year nonstop of the greatest figure eight race on the planet, the World Figure Eight Championship. So that's the biggest race. That's the granddaddy of them all. Back in the 80s, early 90s, we'd have cars. We'd have close to 100 cars coming from the tracks in Michigan and Louisville and Jeffersonville and Florida and California and New York. We would have guys coming all from those great figure eight tracks through the years. And this year, and it kind of corresponds to everybody loved the Indy 500, and there was 80 cars trying to get to 33 spots and bumping and all that sort of stuff. And so just like that has happened, we had 44 cars show up this year for the race, but 30 of them could have won the race. And just much like the Indy 500, where there's now only maybe 1 car going to be bumped, perhaps 2 if we're lucky. There's 25 of those cars could easily win the Indy 500, and that's what happens also with the World Figure Eight Championship 3-hour endurance race. The qualifying this year was we start 28 cars, and there was less than a second in the starting field's qualifying times. That just tells you the incredible depth and the parity of the field. That's why it's so exciting. You don't have to start the race. You don't have to finish the race to win the race. It's the most unique race in the world because it's all about who completes the most laps in the span of 3 hours. So it's like back in the 80s and 90s, you'd have at the Indy 500, you'd have somebody winning by 2 or 3 laps. You'd have that happen back in the day. This year, 4 cars were on the lead lap at the end of 3 hours at the World Figure Eight Championship. It's totally amazing. I don't know if I can share my screen, but I could show some highlights, but you can go to YouTube, see the clips of the World Figure Eight Championship. Our great partners with Low Budget TV, they come out and do that, and you hear Tommy, Mason, and Jeffrey call those races and the excitement that they do, and they've been a great promoter of the figure eight race. But Yes, if you want to come, there's plenty of seating every year. World Figure, not plenty of seating. I should say we're pretty much almost always standing room only for the World Figure Eight Championship. But if you've never been to a World Figure Eight 3-hour endurance race, or if you're not kind of seen it live and in person, you've got to make a chance to go out and come to the race. So this year it's the September 6th, 7th, and 8th, whatever the Saturday after Labor Day this year. It's like one of the earliest times that the race can be held. 48th annual. Tickets will be available in sometime in July when we sell out of our reserve seating. We make sure that everybody gets that. And then September, and then you can go to Ticket Hoss, Ticket HOSS to get that. Oh my gosh, it's 12:55 and just for a seat because everybody's
Yes.
here. We only got through like 3 questions, Mike. I apologize.
You were on a roll.
just
are.
say go and get out of the way, Mike.
No, I mean, you do a great job. I mean, Jonathan, you have tons of energy and passion for, for what you do, and that's really, what's exciting. And as we said many times during this week, I mean, we're here to cover every aspect of the industry, F1 to tractor pulling and everything in between, and that's exactly where you fit. And it's important for us to, put on a spotlight on promoters like you who are doing a tremendous job in really driving people to the grandstands and filling up the fields on the grids, and so that's very important. So thank you, Jonathan, for everything you do.
Registering on EPARTRADE is easy. To start, click on the Join for Free button on the homepage. First, search your company to see if it's already in our database. If you see your company on the list, click on it to select it. Then, choose Claim Company if you are one of the decision makers, an owner, marketing person, or main company contact. Or choose Join Company if you are an employee, and press Continue. If you couldn't find your company in our database, select Register a New Company. On the following page, fill out your name, email, phone number, job title, and choose a secure password. If you chose Register a New Company, you'll need to choose your business type. Select Supplier if you're looking to display products or services and connect with buyers. Choose Racing Business if you're looking to source new parts and connect with suppliers. Choose Race Team if you own or are a member of a professional race team. Then, enter your company name. Please provide a website, Facebook page, or LinkedIn if you have one, and choose to either claim or join the company. You can view and agree to our terms of use here. If you'd like to receive our weekly newsletter, choose Accept. Finally, click Register Now and your registration will be submitted for approval. An email will be sent to your inbox. Please confirm your email address and you will be approved shortly. Welcome to EPARTRADE.